So we're going to have another official debate. We have RETRAC here, we have Jacob for this debate. RETRAC's taking the position that ACAB, all cops are bad, is not true. Jacob is taking the opposition. We're going to keep the time to about 30 minutes this time with light moderation. At the end, if no concessions made, we'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can vote on who you think performed better in the debate. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
All right.
Hey, great. Yeah, thanks for agreeing to debate me, RETRAC. I appreciate that, and thanks for anyone listening to this. I guess I'm defending a sort of the positive of this, so I will make my case for what ACAB means in today's world. So I would say, when we look at what words mean, thank you, Arco, we have to look at their use. We have to look at the ways in which these words are intended, what effects these words as tools have in the world. So when we look at activism, especially activism around police brutality against Black people, systemic racism, we see this phrase ACAB come up a lot. What does it mean? I would say it's a deliberately inflammatory phrase meant to draw people in, yet also it contains a statement which, when properly understood, is defensible entirely. I think all cops participate in a system of racial discrimination against Black people. I think this is an empirical fact, and cops are used to maintain what is essentially a racial caste system within the United States, to deny the economic opportunities of Black people and to mitigate the other institutional failures of the system. So, for instance, the crime which the police defend and our response to is in large ways also created by racial discrimination. So we can see that while we don't mean that the individual self-perception of each police officer is that they are a malevolent individual, that we shouldn't necessarily go by the individual self-assessment of each individual, but rather by the unconscious racial bias that exists within the system, and say that anything that upholds a racial caste system through discriminatory practices, which we can get into the empirical evidence behind, I would say is bad. So we can say that all cops, in that they participate in this system, are bad.
Got it. So if I were to become a police officer today, I would immediately be a bad person. Bad. I'd just be bad. Because
I would
I'm
say,
a part of.
I would say that you have a certain responsibility to what you do as a job. Make sure that it's not entirely unethical, right? So in being a police officer, I think you would have to have made a judgment that this is a good thing to be a part of. And that in a way, I think you've failed your duty to make a self-assessment about what you should do as your occupation.
Okay, so do you have any proof that police, like, do you have any proof of institutional racism?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. Okay, so we have this investigation of the Ferguson Police Department. Perhaps you've heard of Ferguson. We can know that between 2012 and 2014, Black people in Ferguson accounted for 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, and 93% of arrests, despite comprising 67% of the population. Blacks were more than twice as likely as whites to be searched at traffic stops, even after controlling for related variables, though they proved to be 26% less likely to be in possession of illegal drugs. So they're more than twice as likely to be searched, 26% less likely to carry any. Between
Doesn't that
2011 and 2013, blacks also received 95% of jaywalking tickets, 94% of tickets for failure to comply. Racial discrepancy for speeding tickets increased dramatically when based on objective evidence. So black people facing similar low-level charges as white people were 68% less likely to see those charges dismissed in court. More than 90% of the arrest warrants stemming from failure to pay, or failure to appear were issued for black people. So we can see clearly in Ferguson there are large discrepancies to the way that black and white people are treated by the criminal justice system. So I know I rambled through those very quickly, but
all
do you have
right.
issue with any of those?
Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean they're racist. Just means that black people get pulled over more.
But based upon the fact that they are black. So
How can you prove that the cop is only pulling them over because they're black? How can you prove
because
that?
we can look at the discrepancy between the amount that white people of the same situation are pulled over.
You can't prove
instance,
that officer's racist though, and the only reason he's pulling over the black dude is because he's black. You can't prove that.
So
unless the
racism
police officer
exists. So racism exists in 3 ways. There is one way, which is explicit racism. That is where racism is the most obvious, the most on the surface. It is you have a conscious hatred based on race, and you want to express that. So there's explicit racism. That exists on the police force, right? And when it does and uses the institutional power of the police, that is a form of institutional racism. Implicit racism exists. So this is cases where people have unconscious biases. So when we look at the sentencing that black people experience once they are within the criminal justice system, we can see that in cases of the death penalty, black people are far more likely to be sentenced when it comes down to decisions based on the judge's discretion. And we can see that this discrepancy disappears when we look at, so when blacks kill whites, there's a large discrepancy. Blacks are more likely to be sent to the death penalty. When blacks kill other blacks, we do not value that. And the judge's unconscious bias does not trigger. And so they are less likely to be sentenced to death. So we're talking about specific bias based upon race that is implicit within people who then hold institutional power. This exists within policies like stop and frisk. It exists within policies such as jaywalking and this investigation of the Ferguson Police Department, as I say, which is, that black people are far more likely to be searched simply because they're black, right? These are black, anti-black racism instances, right?
Yeah. But that I'm still just not getting how a police officer is racist for pulling over somebody who broke the law.
On the basis of race. This is not pulling someone over. This is pulling someone over because of their race. How is racist?
Do you know if that police officer is racist? Do you know if that police officer is racist?
I don't know specifically, but I know that everyone has unconscious racial bias. So I would say that that police officer is likely not exempt from something that affects every single person.
Okay.
But thing is, if you are just working your job at the convenience store or whatever, your menial job, you don't have really any institutional power with which to inflict your racism upon other people, right? Maybe if you had the chance to hire someone, you would. If you were a manager, then we would see that there's actually quite a bit of institutional racism when it comes to hiring practice, implicit racism, where studies that go out with quote unquote black names are far less likely, resumes that go out are far less likely to be accepted than resumes with quote unquote white sounding name. So there is implicit bias there. So anywhere that there's power and institutional power to express this implicit bias, we see it can manifest, right? When judges have the discretion to sentence, we see it manifest. When we look at jury selection, we see that Black people are less likely to be chosen for juries. We see that Blacks are far more likely to be sentenced for longer for drug offenses like marijuana. We see that Black Americans, are incarcerated for drug offenses at 10 times the rate of white Americans, despite Black and white Americans using and selling drugs, marijuana at least, at the same rates.
So they are not at the same rates?
No. So
At least.
they use at the same rates. But
Right.
Blacks are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated.
Okay, sure. Black people get pulled over, ran the stop sign.
And
Why?
more likely to be searched
Why does that?
after they're pulled over.
Why are they all bad? Why is every cop
So
in the world bad?
So participating in a system of racial discrimination like this means that you are part of this system.
Okay.
And that is bad.
The public school system, it's screwed up, right? It's a mess. So
There are problems.
you could
with
say
it,
that
yes.
all teachers and students are bad. All teachers and students who go to public schools are bad.
Well, I wouldn't say that the public education system is necessarily something designed to aid in the oppression and maintenance of a racial caste system. If anything, a public education system would work against notions of stratification within society and help people do what they can to overcome the struggles and differences that they've been placed in by their situation.
Well, how about police agencies, police stations? You know, there's plenty of police stations all over the world who are against racism. So why are you calling them bad?
So what I'm saying is that although they may on the surface say that they are against racism, at least when we're talking about the United States, they do maintain racial discriminatory policies, both on the books and covert. So we can see a lot of the times that these things are not necessarily written down, but like the assumption between cops that, I have to cover for you and you have to cover for me. If anything happens, if you, cold cock a kid on duty and he goes blind, I have to then cover for you and say that, that did not happen, or that, you were doing it in self-defense, et cetera, that he came at you with a knife. So there are these unwritten rules, as well as like old sort of official policies, right, that discriminate against Black people, right?
Mm-hmm. So when you say
other
all
racial minorities,
when you say all cops are bad, I take that by you saying all cops are bad, meaning
right?
every cop that exists in the world is bad. So
Right.
you're
So I
telling
want
me
to
that
locate
African
this.
cops are racist against Black people.
No,
That's
I'm
like
not saying that.
you're saying that all
You need
cops are
to
bad, though.
apply. So what I'm saying applies to a United States political situation.
All right. So why don't you just say American United States cops
I
from the
would
United
say
States are bad? Why
also.
don't you just say that, man?
So that's where the statement
'Cause-
emerged in its original use. But since then, it has been taken on and used around the world. So I think the statement that that and the anti-Black racism we've been talking about doesn't exist in every country, obviously, but racism exists in every country. Oppression exists in every country, and the police, as an oppressive force, exists to maintain the status quo in every country. So we can see that, in Canada, there is a lot of racism against Native people. There's an enormous amount of institutional racism and discrimination that we could talk about, but that's maybe not the subject of our debate. But it does exist, where they, literally take you out in like a freezing Manitoba winter without like the proper clothes on, and they just drop you at the edge of town, expect you to walk back, and you can count like the number of people who have died, right? And no one cares, right? And this isn't even going to like missing and murdered Indigenous women who literally no one cared about. The police just like had a massive backlog of like missing persons cases they like did not care about, right? So these things do exist, right, in every society. To say that, haha, this does not apply to like Nigeria, haha, I have disproven the point, misses like the larger point, right? And we could do like a very like detailed analysis of Nigeria's police force, but frankly, like I'm not an expert in
All
Nigerian
right, well,
politics.
so far you've proven that cops, not all, but some cops are bad. So why
No,
are you
I would say that
still
all
why are you still holding
cops,
on to
by virtue
the
of
statement? Good lord, man.
because it's by virtue of being police officers, right? By virtue of being a police officer, you are bad, dude.
Oh, you're bad.
Now,
Come on,
yeah,
man.
you are, because you
What?
participate within this
He
system and perpetuate it.
sure he's
Now,
a police officer.
now,
He's not.
now we can talk about. Do you want to talk about the moral character of police officers? I feel like that's where you want to go.
Sure. Sure.
Sure. Okay, because it seemed like you're saying like, oh, I'm impugning the moral character of police officers. I'm saying like each individual brave police officer isn't like a great person or whatever.
That's
Is that
what I'm
what you're
hearing.
saying?
So, you're saying that they're all indirectly bad.
So I would say that this system they all buy into, like we could say like, oh, the Nazi soldiers were incredibly brave and heroic, right? But
Yeah.
the system they bought into was bad, right? So I think it's entirely analogous here. So we can say that,
The thing is with the Nazis, man. They
okay, but
hated Americans.
again,
Not every cop hates black people, man. They're not all racist. The thing with the Nazis are, yeah, they bought into that. They hate Americans. They wanted to rip us to parts. Do you think that every police officer wants to rip black people to parts? No. That's the thing, man.
no, I don't believe that every police officer does that. I believe there are some that do, and there are some with implicit bias. And to get towards the third type of institutional racism
And
is
Jews.
simply racism by outcome. Whereas perhaps there even is no implicit bias. Perhaps we are just robots. In a system of pure robots, we can see that if those robots make choices by like even if they're self-interested choices, they use a racial heuristic to do that. If they're making those choices through like a racial lens, then we can call that racism. Does that make sense? So that if there's a racist,
So just
if there's an
because of
outcome
oh my
of incredible inequality, for example, you know if we simply say, okay, let's just, things are incredibly disproportionate. There's redlining. There's been like a denial of financial opportunities. There have been countless levels of systemic oppression, but we're just going to now treat everyone as individuals, and we're just going to go into a purely like, no, I just treat you as an individual system without even addressing race, right? We then would still see racial disparities play out because we literally just created them like 50 years ago, right? So the fact that we don't have racial intent now doesn't say anything to whether these systems that we put in place when we did have racial intent are still working out their logic, right? They're still carrying themselves out. So I don't think we should look at the individual self-assessment of police officers when we determine whether they're bad. You can think you are a hero, but you're still working towards a bad end.
Okay. Forced into okay. Oh, ow. Sorry. I hit my knee.
Oh, bro. Sorry.
Oh my god.
Take that as a victory then, I guess. So I guess, I would say also about the moral character of cops that, these are institutions that prey upon people looking for power, prey
Okay.
upon people who
I
crave authority. And these people, have a tendency to attract bullies, right? Not every cop, but certainly plenty of cops
that's your
do
statement,
have
though.
a kind of a toxic attitude, right? And these toxic attitudes, when these cops become, members of a hierarchical authoritarian organization, do affect the institutional policy. So these people who are, perhaps like high school bullies, they have a loss of power in their lives. They decide that they want that power again. They want to shoot off cool guns. They go and join the cops, and then they are, poorly trained,
Join the
highly
cops.
militarized, right? Because they're given, to join the police force, right? They are poorly
Okay.
trained. They are given like military grade weaponry, and quite often then they're pointed at like a community of lower income, perhaps an inner city. They live in the suburbs of a city, mostly white, and then these mostly white people
And then
police the inner cities in highly militarized fashions while they're undertrained, right? So what you have is not a recipe for great moral characters here. You're not in the Iliad and the Odyssey. We're not dealing with great heroes all the time. Perhaps there are individual brave cops, right? I wouldn't want to impugn that. This statement doesn't impugn that. But it does have the tendency to attract a certain kind of negative behavior outcome.
okay. So at that point, I think, if you're really worried about the school bully thing, go back to the school records. You can see, like, they have it all in the records. But I don't really care about that because it's whatever. But okay, back to what I was gonna say before. Just because one police agency might have pulled over a bunch of black people, now you're saying that they're racist. Now you're saying all the cops are racist just because some might have been racist.
Okay, so what I showed you was one study, but we have
Yeah,
many
there's
other
a lot.
studies about the criminal
There's a
justice
lot of
system.
studies.
Right. So you can look at biases in death penalty sentencing, which I mentioned before. We saw that black defendants are 4.5 times as likely to receive the death penalty as similarly situated whites. That means when you're taking into account the number of priors, everything that could be taken into account, they take into account, right? We see that race is by far the most influential statistical factor when determining the death sentence. Looking at death penalty sentence, we see this is an analysis of 33 years of data from Washington State. So Washington State clearly is probably not like the worst offender in terms of this, but we see it even there. We can see implicit bias in eyewitness accounts. So we can see that if you have like a blurry like television or a blurry like security camera or something, people are far more likely to identify to misidentify the person on camera, to give a false positive, to say, oh yeah, that's definitely the person who did it, if the suspect is black than if they are white. If they're white, the person will say, oh no, that wasn't the person. Far more likely. We see there are racial biases. There are all sorts of racial biases. So it's not simply Ferguson. We can go like for days on these.
I mean that doesn't really prove anything because that could just prove that black people commit more crimes or anything like that, you know?
No, no, because this is specifically
Well,
about
how,
black
how
people.
am
It's
I
not
how am I
they
supposed to
commit
know the
more
people in the
crimes. No, this is about
camera
disparity
footage
between.
weren't
This is
black?
about a disparity between similarly situated criminals. You have one white criminal and one black criminal. The black criminal is being discriminated against by his race as the most influential statistical factor. This is not about black people committing more crime. LOL.
What? How am I? Okay, so
It's just a
black people
simple
get
non sequitur, right? This is one guy who's commit the exact
yeah.
same amount of offenses, the same offense as another guy. The only difference is their race. If we look at like their poverty, if we look at
Can you send
men
me
and women, it's
the
like
where you're getting all this? Send it to me. Where you're getting? Do you have the police report and the
I
like
do,
the court
yes.
documents? Okay.
Just one moment. It's a study, by the way.
Okay, so it's not like
No, it's a
police
study
report.
of multiple. So it's a
Got it.
study
Who?
of.
Well,
So Washington role of race in Washington State capital sentencing,
who wrote it?
1981 to 2014. The role of race in Washington State capital sentencing.
Who
So
wrote
I
it?
can. Just one
Okay,
second.
yeah, Cool Dog has a good point.
What is he saying? 'Cause
The jury decides the death penalty, not the police. The police are the enforcers. The jury is the judicial system. Those are
okay,
two
but
different.
no, the
Those are
jury.
entirely two different branches of the government. The
Okay,
jury is.
so I
They're
do want to
not
correct you because it's actually the judge's discretion on the death penalty.
the
The jury,
judge.
I believe, and the
Again,
jury, it's
a judge is not
also
a police
racially
officer.
selected. I
So you
agree.
should go ahead and say all judges are bad, man. That's what the judicial system is bad. You should be saying that.
So I would agree. So I would be making a case that the entire legal system, which, you know, if you watch Law and Order, the police are one part of and one half of, is
Yeah,
bad. Right?
they
If you are a
enforce
system
it.
of people that, so imagine if you're a system of slavers, right? You treat your slaves like incredibly nicely. All you do is you kidnap them, put them in little boxes, and ship them to someone who is going to racially discriminate against them. Is that really good?
So
So I
mean,
did download this file. Let me.
please. I mean, well, now you're changing your point up.
Here.
Now you're saying that the legal system is all bad. Why are you saying all cops are bad now? If they're the only.
So
You know,
so if your role is to hand someone over to someone that is bad, then wouldn't you also be bad, kind of?
well, how are the police supposed to know that like the judges are bad? You know.
I mean, there are a lot of studies
Okay,
we can see right here.
with the sentencing thing, it really depends. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and I don't think race. I'm sure there's racist judges out there. Come on.
No, no, dude. This is a study here. Read this.
But the thing is,
Here, I posted
okay.
it finally because I'm on my
I
phone.
want
Sorry, it
to
took long.
I want to see the. Okay, it's not. It's redirecting me.
You just click that one thing and then you'll download it.
How am I supposed to know that this is like official? It's a bunch of writing.
You could read it.
Got it. So does that prove to me that it's true? That it's factual?
So this is 33 years of data from Washington State.
Got it. State of Washington.
Just a heads up, guys, in 30 seconds it would have been 30 minutes, so we can do closing statements, or if you feel like you have more to say, then we can give it another 5, or do whatever you want, really.
Cool. Yeah, I'm good to move to closing statements here.
All right.
Empirical evidence of
Let's do it.
systemic racism. Okay. So, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first? What do you want to?
You go first.
Okay. So I think we've clearly shown, or at least I've tried to show, that to take this word, this statement in its hyper literal meaning, to where you deny all context to it being said, is foolish. If you look at within the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, current debate about police brutality in the United States and other parts of the world,
Right.
we can see this message clearly has an effect. Its effect is to draw attention to these issues, get people a little bit riled up, to bring them in. It could have a negative effect, perhaps, of driving certain people away, giving people the wrong impression. But when we look at what it means, we can clearly see that all cops are bad to the extent they participate within a racist system. And all cops do participate in that system by virtue of being cops. I think I've hoped to show, perhaps not to the best of my ability, that institutional racism exists, that police force is racist, that racism perhaps is, assumption, we're going to say racism is bad, having these systems is bad. So by virtue of participating in these systems, they are bad. Doesn't really want to make a statement about
you've kind of
the
proven to be
individual
more
character, but I would say that the individual self-assessment of each cop is not the metric you want to go on when determining something like implicit bias, which by its very definition, it's not going to be accessible to an individual self-assessment. We should instead look to the massive amounts of data that show that Black boys are viewed as older, less innocent by whites, that judgments about physical size and formidability about Black people are disproportionate, and other things that go into the racial discrimination of Black people by the police, which is bad.
When you say hyper literal, that means that I'm like what you're
saying. What I'm saying is you're misunderstanding on purpose, or perhaps
I'm literally reading. I'm interpreting what you were saying. How I'm supposed to be interpreting it.
Well, I think you guys are doing closing statements, so if you can, just don't respond to each other. But Jacob, if you wanted to finish yours, because I don't know if you finished.
No, we're good. RETRAC, do you want to just give your closing statement and
sure?
And we'll
call? I think what he said about he's kind of just rambled up the definition of all cops are bad, and he brought the judicial system into this and all that, and this gave me more confidence that all cops are not bad. Even though I didn't think they were before. This just, it gives me hope that I don't know. Last words are all cops are not bad. I don't know how to make a closing statement, so
It's no worries, man. It just takes practice. I think everybody goes about it differently. For me, I just kind of sum up my major points and just any final things I want to say to the audience before they vote or something like that. But anyways, if you're all done, cool. To the audience that was here for at least 2/3 of the debate, I'm going to be posting